So good afternoon, everyone, and you're very welcome to our third Fields of Knowledge session for the 2025-2026 season. We have a highly interesting panel and discussion theme for today's session, where we'll focus on the ever-present topic of farmer mental health, particularly through the lens of service provision. So for those of you who it's your first time joining the Fields of Knowledge session, you're very welcome. And for those of you who are back with us again, welcome back. And so just to give some context about Fields of Knowledge. So the essence of it is all about bringing together researchers, practitioners, and community leaders to tackle some pressing issues within rural America today, with a particular focus on the farming community. And our focus for today's session is on a topic that seems, as I said earlier on, to be getting more and more attention nationally, and that is the reality of farmer mental health. So we know that farmers face particular challenges in relation to their mental health and routinely report some of the highest rates of suicide by occupation across the United States. But today we're going to broaden that discussion on this topic, particularly looking at successful intervention strategies that have been rolled out across various regions, with also an international focus for today's session. So just before I introduce our panelists, just some housekeeping rules. So the chat function is open, and you can see that on the top of your screen. And we'd encourage participants to, as the conversation is underway, to share your own thoughts, your own reflections, and any comments or questions that you may have in the chat function. One of the central elements of this, or tenets of this program, is for it to be highly interactive. So we really encourage any attendees today to please share your reflections as the conversation gets underway. And also, just in addition to that, I'm very conscious that the topic that we have that is under discussion today is likely to be of a very personal nature to many people. And so if we could just be mindful of that when we are sharing any reflections or comments as we navigate our way through this topic. So without further ado, let me introduce our panel. As you can see here on our screen, first up we have Dr. Andrea Bjornstad, who is a professor and extension specialist at South Dakota State University. She's a licensed professional counselor and leading statewide efforts to train agricultural service providers in stress and suicide prevention. Next up, we have Becky Wiseman. Becky is a family consultant and case supervisor with New York FarmNet. She brings decades of experience supporting farm families through financial, relational, and mental health challenges. And next up then we have Chris, who's a farmer for today's session. Chris is a former onion farmer and mental health advocate, known for his documentary Muckville, and has been outspoken on the emotional toll of farming and agricultural policy pressures. And just we have one other panelist who's going to be joining us in a short while. That's Finola Colgan. Finola Colgan comes from Ireland. She's going to bring an Irish and European perspective to the context of farmer mental health and support provision today. Finola is a lecturer of law and mental health training specialist at the Technological University of the Shannon in Ireland. And whose work on Firm Ground and Farm Connect has equipped Ireland's farming community with essential support services, particularly through the lens of ag extension and advisory support. So you're all very welcome. How's everybody doing? Andrea, I might come to you first. Maybe just from your own perspective, given that you've been involved in so much of this, from a data collection point of view, a research point of view, and then also training up support provision for farmers. Can you just maybe give us a small bit of context of what are the biggest challenges faced in farmer mental health today, and what's the role of service providers in identifying and supporting the farming community?
Sure. And honestly, that's a tough question when you pose it. What are the biggest challenges? There are a lot of them right now. And so to narrow it down is very challenging. I would say, there's a lot of structural barriers in place from a larger perspective, but all of that contributes to financial uncertainty and feelings of loss of control. So there are so many factors that producers feel like they cannot control. And, when we're in our not normal, but when we're in our occupations, a lot of things we can control, but a lot of what's in their occupation they can't control. So I guess I would contribute those as the biggest factors. And then you pull in a lot of, I mean, that contributes to increased stress, increased maybe symptoms of depression or anxiety. And then, we talk about suicide risk being very high. So all of those things play a role. As far as service providers go, a lot of them interact with farmers and ranchers on a daily basis, and so they hear. I mean, they can experience secondary stress too with working with populations that are experiencing high stress. So I'll hear from farmers that, hey, if I'm struggling, I'm going to talk to my lender because we're
Right.
buddies. We worked together for so long that if I'm struggling, I'm going to talk to them about some concerns. Well, they're not necessarily trained to handle maybe some symptoms of depression or anxiety or those sorts of things. So across, I can speak from the Midwest, we've been trying to work on training service providers to be able to respond or at least identify someone who is struggling because it looks different for everybody.
Right, right. That's a really good starting point. Like I think because like with farming, like there is an expected stress, I think, is associated with it, and it kind of that people that farmers would take that on board. But increasingly, what we're seeing, and we're seeing it here in New York too, is the unexpected stress and the outside things that are really creating that kind of like an excess difficulty for many farmers. And then against the backdrop then is what you said, that kind of ecosystem of, accidental counselors that nearly, in terms of close confidence that farmers draw on to talk about these things. And often people get, difficult scenarios get placed on people that, typically might not have the skills to deal with these kind of things. And I think, Becky, for yourself and for FarmNet, could you just give us a bit of context or a bit of insight into what FarmNet does, how it operates, and what are the kind of challenges that FarmNet would experience maybe within the farming community?
Sure, thank you. Well, FarmNet is an 501c3, so our primary location is Cornell University, and we're funded through New York State Ag Markets and the Office of Mental Health. But some of the things that make our program unique is that the farmer calls us.
Right.
When they want to talk with somebody about either a financial concern or relationship concern, a death in the family, changes in the way that they're going to be practicing, and also transitioning to other kinds of agricultural use. They are unique individuals. Their farming is in their blood, and they work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so many times when they call us, they're calling about like a financial issue. I think Andrea spoke about they have financial issues and concerns that come up. But once we go to their home, we sit around their table in the kitchen, we find out what's going on. We find many times that there are family conflicts, there are stressors, emotional stressors that are interwoven with their financial stressors.
Right, that's one of the amazing things that I've always found about FarmNet, that it deals with the issues at, the multitude of levels and doesn't isolate, because there can be a tendency to isolate farmer mental health as like a farmer problem, as an individual problem. But, in reality, it exists, at a multitude of levels. And Chris, I think you might be able to speak to, the reality of that. You've been involved in advocacy for farmer mental health. For a while, you've been involved in, the creation of that documentary, Muckville, that was hugely successful. And congratulations on that. Would you just like to maybe lend us your perspective on this whole topic and the context of farmer mental health and where supports are at and how farmers can be supported a bit better?
Well, first off, I have to say I want to echo what Andrea and Becky said. They put things really well. There are, obviously a great deal There's a reason why the average age of farmers in this country is in the mid to upper 50s, and more are going out of business because there are so many different types of pressures that they have to deal with. We deal with market pressures, labor, weather, and most of the things that we have to deal with, we have zero or minimal control over. The other thing that happens too is I farm and I also teach at a local VOTEC school. And at the school, I interact and deal with colleagues, fellow teachers and administration, so on and so forth, every day. And they see me every day, and it's a number of people. Farmers quite often, in most cases, are isolated. Yes, they have interactions with some of their neighbors and so on and so forth, but quite often they don't. Quite often their neighbors are viewed, neighboring farmers, I should say, are viewed as being competition as well. So that isolation leads to a lot of issues or problems. FarmNet, as Becky said, is an extremely good program. And I've been doing public policy advocacy for like 30 years on a number of issues, crop insurance, disaster aid, and the like. And one of the things I've been doing as of late is I've been recommending to my contacts on the Hill that FarmNet as a model should be expanded all across the country. AgriSafe is another organization that does a very good job as well. But the services that FarmNet offers, the comprehensive services ranging from, like you said, like we use them. My farm, we used them 3 times. The first was years ago to create a trust and set up and establish to protect our assets, which was actually saved us because later after my father passed, my mom had dementia and it got worse. And if we didn't have what FarmNet helped set up, we would have lost everything from my mother's care. The second time is we had, after my father passed, my brother and I were farming together for a period and we had conflict and they came in to try and help us work it out. And then the third time is when, after it became apparent it would no longer be able to onion farm, it wasn't sustainable anymore. They sent, and they knew that I was having mental challenges and the like. 2 reps were sent, and one dealt with Greg, who dealt with the business aspect, and the other, Jennifer, was dealing with the emotional, mental aspect of what we were dealing with, and it was extremely helpful. And again, it's an ongoing, long-standing problem. I know of in my small community, relatively small community of farmers in the Black Dirt region in Orange County, New York. I know of it. Probably I could count either conventionally or ways in which I view as being kind of a slow-mo way of ending your life. Half a dozen or more farmers over the years who have ended their lives, and so this is a critical problem or issue. It's 60 Minutes just did that story or touched on it in that story a few weeks ago, and it's something that needs to really be addressed more and more. And Muckville, and I hope people can watch it if they haven't. It's a 19-minute short. It's available on, if you go on Google and type in the word Muckville, Muckville, and then the word Hudsy, Hudsy, which is the company that financed it. You can go to their site. You have to register to watch it. Registration's free. They don't spam you. And it really, in a very powerful narrative way, not narrative, but in a powerful way, focusing on our story, it really shows what the pressures we're facing and then what, challenges and how they need to be addressed.
Right. It's really interesting. Andrea, just building on that, as I think Chris gave us a good kind of background there of kind of the evolving dynamics of farmer mental health, and we have far more of an understanding of it now than we probably ever had. Where do you think the research is at in this space at the moment, and particularly in terms of extension agents and supporting, I suppose, non-traditional, non-mental health support people who have close relationships with the farming community, who are often very trusted confidants with the farming community, and equipping them with kind of the more softer skills, I suppose, to engage in this kind of sensitive topic with the farming community. Yeah.
I think a lot of the research has increased related to, you used the term earlier about accidental counselors, and I think that term has increased in attention. But I think what's challenging though is that we're still trying to determine how how to decrease suicides in
Right.
farmers and ranchers, and trying to figure out what are those suicide risk factors. And there's certainly various hypotheses about how farmers maybe possibly proceed through the suicide pathway faster than others. So to a lot of training has gone into trying to educate service providers on how to identify farmers who are in distress. So lots of programs are in existence, and I can talk about some of those later.
Right.
But by training, they're essentially almost the front line
Right. Right.
people responding to farmers right now. And so by training them in certain areas, hopefully we're helping some of those some of those issues. But again, trying to understand. So for example, one of my research studies showed that it was not a mental illness that was the highest risk factor for suicide. It was actually self-blame. So it was not depression,
Right.
it wasn't
Right.
anxiety, it was self-blame. And really thinking about, how do we see self-blame in somebody?
Right.
Self-blame is a really internal thing. I mean, we can hear comments, maybe there's some verbal comments or some nonverbal behaviors, but how do we see somebody's internal self-blame? And that's really I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, how do I educate others on being able to see some of that? Because if that is a high suicide risk factor, maybe there's something to explore more there.
Right. That's really interesting. We're conducting a piece of work here through the center that looks at farm consolidation across New York State and the Northeast more broadly. And, just like larger farms absorbing smaller to medium-sized farms and stuff like that. And you do really see that um, the ripple effects of that, like at an identity level of what you're kind of talking about there, and the self-blame that kind of comes with that for a farmer who feels like they've ended the generational responsibility to uphold that kind of farming identity, when in reality they're farming in a much different climate than previous generations would have had, because price volatility and whatnot. I just see a couple of comments coming in to the chat there, but before we get to that, Finola, you might sorry, Becky, we might just come back to you for a second. I'm just wondering, in terms of training up people and to having this, because I think it's a very specialized context, and we would have worked at this in Ireland too as well, on training up frontline workers who work with farmers directly. And and it was interesting, one of the early things that we done was went to that community, asked them what they're seeing. And we were surprised with, when we were developing a wider training program for this, how many of the answers already existed within those frontline advisors, and they just needed more of kind of the nuance, the safety kind of measures to open conversations more safely and stuff like that. I'm just wondering, at FarmNet, have you worked on training measures for people who deal with these kind of things, in terms of mental health first aid and how to open these things, these kind of sensitive topics? And if you could give us just maybe some context around that, that'd be great.
Yes, absolutely. We have been opening up programs. One, for instance, is called, what you're saying, is Mental Health First Aid. Another is Talk Saves Lives. And both of those programs are focused on, how do you recognize signs of stress in individuals' lives, signs of indications that they may be considering suicide. What do you do when that occasion arises? Another situation that we're really working on, I think I'm really sensitive to these first responders that see farmers on the front line. One, for instance, is the veterinarians.
Right.
The large animal veterinarians and the stressors that they are under. We work with vet students at Cornell around these issues. And one of the things that Andrea was speaking about is that the farmer said that the person at the bank is like their friend.
Right.
And that in and of itself is a stressor for the banker, or for the veterinarian, or for the feed person or crop advisor, is that they become like like gifted, I guess you would say, with the struggles that the farmer is going through, and then how do they respond? I think that's a really, really essential piece for us all to look at these days, because they're under stress too.
Right. And so much of this, you know, even about that, about for these, you know, who we would see as like frontline people, so much of it is like just an art more than a science, you know, because you
Yes.
need to know, you know, a lot of the kind of relational aspects of an individual that you said that are very context specific. And I just leading on to that, I see Amanda Room's question here in the chat. I typically work in the mental health realm with commercial fishermen, and it's often difficult to get these sensitive conversations. And then she often like using analogies she talks about here. We often start with "how's your boat" or something similar, which often segues, but not always, into stressors and mental health. Has your experience in ag been similar? How do you ease into these sensitive topics? Not sure if anyone wants to pick up on that.
I mean, I'll speak just from my own experience that building trust is one of the most important things that we do at FarmNet. And trust happens in that very first relationship. The building of being honest and open, and not telling somebody what to do, but having an opening ear, listening non-judgmentally. Many times when I start, I'll talk about the weather. Like what's it doing outside today, with, is it snowing, or how are things going? And that leads, I'm very attentive, listening to the direction that the farmer is going in, and will follow their lead.
Mhm. Chris, would you like to come in on anything there?
Well, I have to say that one of the, main problems is, and it's which makes it difficult, is the fact that there's a stigma attached with, suicide and mental issues. That's one reason why I think it's grossly underreported, because in some cases, I think people don't want to admit, family members later or the like don't want to admit that's what happened. And, regarding, I mean, I've said this before, and having, um, having mental health issues is something where farmers quite often, and a lot of people in society too, don't want to admit to. And the message I keep making is, if you have your stomach's having problems, you go to a gastroenterologist. You have headaches, you go to a neurologist. You have any kind of physical ailment, you go to the doctor, especially for it. Mental health challenges are no different. They need to be viewed the same way. And if you are having issues of the like, and it's a message I've talked to some of my neighbors about, you need to reach out to someone who can potentially help you. Just like you have of course, some farmers reject any going to a doctor too, but
Right.
you wanna go to
Right.
who can help you. You want to go to, and that's one of the messages that needs to go out there. And that was one of the points we try to do at Muckville. We try to, again, and this is our experience my wife and I have had over the years in dealing with any kind of like public policy or like issues, is the more you can humanize it and make it something on that level, the more the viewer, the audience can identify with it and then apply the message and the like to themselves. And that's what, historically the last 30 some years that I've tried to do in any kind of issue I work with, and humanize it, make it something
Yes.
personal and they can
Right.
identify with.
Right. That's really interesting. And just following on from the chat here, see Alan Davis, going back to your point, Andrea, in relation to self-blame, feeling of failing or falling short, feeling family and family history is likely huge. I touched on the point about identity and stuff like that, and being a farmer is such like a potent identity to many individuals within this community. And I promise, just before we get into this, that we will talk about more protective mechanisms of farming too as well later on. We were in a meeting yesterday, and there's often the underestimated protective aspects towards mental health of farming that we'll get into in a bit. But just going back to that point that Alan brought up about self-blame that you introduced earlier, Andrea. Would you like to build on that point in any way in relation to farmers?
Oh, I sure can. And those of you that farm can speak much better to all this, but I think that, and I think Chris brought this up earlier about the issues related to farm succession. I don't know about other states, but in South Dakota, we have a lot of conversations about how the younger generation does not want to take over the family farm. So we're seeing the legacy end on some farms. And then, I recently saw a headline where, gosh, it was like 50% of farms won't even break even this year. So, and I trained pastors a couple weeks ago on working, how to identify farmers who are struggling. And someone came in from a bank first and was talking about the financial markets. And a pastor commented, "Wow, it feels like they're just gambling. Like
Right.
their occupation is all about gambling," and that hits home. So with the self-blame, if you go that route, you make one decision, and if you're the type of person that dwells on that, your negative thoughts can just cycle and cycle downward until,
Right.
and just continue that way. So I guess those are some of the things that come up when I think about self-blame. But I did want to add a little bit about those conversations with farmers. I present to different ag organizations every year across South Dakota and actually regionally. And I kind of ease my way into it with talking about stress. I don't, nobody wants to talk about depression or anxiety right away, but and I'm a licensed counselor, if I admit that I struggle with stress and I struggle with always coping well, like I have all the tools, I should know how to cope, right? But I don't always cope well. And if I self-disclose that, they actually pass the microphone around and they talk about their stress because they know, hey, she's standing up there and admitting she's not perfect. So now I can talk. So you
Right.
kind of sometimes that's helpful to ease your way into it. Don't just start off with something, really, really tough, but everybody has stress in some form, and it's just a matter of, talking about, okay, how do we know when it's stress and how do we know when we've crossed that line into something a little bit more serious, such as depression or anxiety, because they look very similar. So that's a
Right.
lot of the education that I do with farmers. So I don't know if that's helpful to anybody, but I self-disclose too, that I struggle as well. So it eases its way in.
I know it's hugely interesting. We ran a number of focus groups, across upstate New York in relation to this topic, over the last couple of months, and it's interesting. Like, in not one focus group did we find that there was a resistance to engaging in the topic. And the lesson is that it's just about finding the right safe space for people to feel vulnerable, and trying to find the right hook. Um,
And Connor,
and
and I've conducted numerous focus groups too, and I get these. I had female focus groups and male focus groups, and the
right.
males, they actually said, "I wish we could do this more often because it's so nice to talk in a group like this." So those of
Right.
you out there, I would actually encourage something like that, because I actually had to leave and get to one of my daughter's sporting events, and they're like, "Let's just stay and keep talking."
I
So,
know.
so Connor,
They're
I agree with
amazing.
you. Those groups are very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we should have one for academics too, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I just see Alan has another comment in here. How is season crops, whether critters are good conversation openers? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Just other topics on that too as well. We're also just like, and one of the things that routinely came up for us when we're chatting with farmers and stuff like that is how they're often perceived in wider society and the media and stuff like that, and particularly around the environment and these type of things. And because I think there's a wider climate of, as we said, like there's various levels to which this operates and how you're perceived at in society, and that has definitely taken a hit, in recent years, among farmers. And I just think that there's a wider role of media and how they uphold farmers in community, and that's not to to kind of diminish, you know, the reality of the environment and stuff like that. But you know, there often can be very simplistic narratives around the farming community, and that you know, really kind of marginalize the farming community. Sorry, Chris, you want to come in there?
Yeah, two things. Well, one is going back to the thing about the legacy stuff. Again, that's one of the primary messages of Mockville. I'm fourth generation, and our farm was started by my great grandfather, the turn of the previous century. What's great about the film, I have a lot of archival footage of our family, photographs and 8mm films, photographs going back to the early 1900s, 8mm films going back to the 1950s, and it really shows, you know, what a long period of time and history regarding like what we did, which, you know, primarily onion farming. In there is a picture of me as a 5-year-old working in the field, literally guiding an onion crate down as we were mechanically harvesting. And that was one of the big things. It was very difficult. I mean, you feel like such a failure. You've been doing something, your family's been doing something for so many decades, and then all of a sudden you can't do it anymore. And also too, I had the pressure of my two sons. My oldest in particular was interested, liked farming. He liked working on the farm, but he didn't like the fact that we don't make money. We're struggling each year. He wanted to be in an occupation where he made money. And right now he's gone. He's a civil engineer in Chicago. My other son doesn't have an interest really in doing it. He's got another job, and it may in the end down the road end with me. And that's an incredible amount of pressure. Regarding the imagery, that's a good point too. There is such simplistic on some levels view of what farmers are and do and the like. One example I think of is I'm a onion farmer now, vegetables. I'm a specialty crop farmer, and the public's notion of farmers is that farmers are taken care of by the government. We all get subsidies and the like, and so on and so forth. It was years ago, back in like when the Farm Bill was being done in the 02 Farm Bill, I believe it was, and my I think it was the 02, or it might have been even actually in the 90s, but C-SPAN did a segment on this, and my wife was a caller in. And I actually, if you go to my YouTube channel, you can watch the segment, you can hear it. And my wife pointed out the fact that, you know, specialty crops account for a large percentage of the gross dollar of the farming, net farming dollar in the United States, but yet there's virtually no programs for us. The programs that exist is some minor conservation programs, occasional disaster aid, and the federal crop insurance program. If you have like 5 hours, I'll give you that's what I testified before the Senate on years ago. I can give you a lowdown on that. But basically we fly without a net, and there isn't much help. But yet the public though has the notion that, oh yeah, you have nothing to worry about. If you lose your crop to a weather event or you can't sell it or so on and so forth, the government bails you out. Well, guess what? No, I'm still currently, the documentary talks about the fact that I worked on a provision that eventually got in the Inflation Reduction Act. It was a farmer debt provision. That was my provision. I created that, and Senator Gillibrand championed it, and eventually a version of it got into the Inflation Reduction Act. In the end, it didn't forgive all my debt. It forgave some of it, but I'm still carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and I'll probably carry that till I die. And again, the public has this notion that, oh, you have nothing to worry about. And that's just simply not the reality of economic marketing and public policy reality that's out there. And that's a message that needs to get told, that there's different types of farming, there's different levels of assistance, and it's not all the same. We're not all one universal group.
And it looks so bucolic. You know, people think, oh, what? You're out there in the beautiful countryside, everything is beautiful. Why do you have stress?
I'm laughing.
I know, right?
I can give you a million reasons. Yeah, exactly. But the public has that notion, and
Right.
and they also think, it's funny too, is there's this notion also too that we're all, again, politically have all the same identity. We're all, we're not very well educated. And I understand when you're a farmer, you have to know economics, you have to know marketing, you have to know chemistry, you have to know, there's a whole wide range of different things that you have to know or be able to avail yourself of help from. And so, it's a very complex, it's not, you're right, it's a bucolic image, and at times I love being outside. I love driving tractors. That's why I came back to it after a couple of years being away from it. But yeah, it's not as simple as people think it is. It's very, 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 very complex business.
I'm just wondering, I just see some of the chats here, and one question here in relation to peer-to-peer groups or group therapy in relation to that. As we were saying earlier on, I don't think it's not a problem when we get people into the room. The problem is trying to get people in spaces where maybe these conversations can occur. Would anyone like to speak to that maybe? About getting more hard to reach farmers maybe involved in this, maybe some of the farmers that you might maybe have concerns about how to reach out to them, who might be hesitant in reaching out to formal services and that, and any reflections on that.
You know, one of the things that we're offering is farmer coffee, morning coffee, farmer breakfast, and it's just for farmers to come and hang out, have a breakfast, talk with each other. It's not necessarily, I mean, sometimes some of our staff or consultants attend those breakfasts, but it's just for farmer to farmer. And I do know that some cooperative extensions across New York State also have these for dinners. I've put together at times in the past a women's farmers group where we come together as women, bring a casserole, sit around and talk in the evenings, and all have felt like it's a supportive environment where men, women can just come together and share informally. Very supportive.
Right, I'm reminded of that quote, the antidote to despair is connection. And
Yes.
much of what we're talking about here is, stronger patterns of connection and relations with people within your own community that are having very similar experiences to you in that. I'm just encouraging again attendees, if you have any further, I see there's a number of comments in the chat at the moment. If you have any further comments or questions or reflections to make, please just place them in the chat and we'll get them to our panelists. I wonder, Andrea, just to bring it back to the area of research in that, could you just maybe speak to the reality of trying to get data and understanding about this area and then trying to apply that into practice, and maybe give us a little maybe summation of that, or what that looks like, because often we meet farmers and we say we're conducting this bit of research, and sometimes they might be a bit alienated about it. They might have came across it before, and research takes a long time maybe to come back around before you see the benefits of it, and there can be just kind of a detachment with that between research and reality often.
Sure. The best example I have is I conducted a needs assessment on farm stress and mental health in South Dakota. And to my knowledge, it had never been done. And so I conducted focus groups and key informant interviews. And how I went about it is I created an advisory board first, and it was 10 different leaders from 10 different ag organizations, and including the South Dakota Department of Agriculture, who helped inform the questions that I was asking regarding farm stress and mental health. And we had, I want to say it was 36 key informant interviews, and then focus groups with 180 farmers, including just a diverse group ranging from agribusiness professionals, ag leaders, ag educators, farmers, new farmers, and then spouses. I also mailed 10,000 surveys to farmers, and ended up with, I think the sample size was close to 2,200. But what's really neat is I have about 800 couples I get to look at, the spouse and the farmer. So I'm in the process of that. But to take it and apply it, so we run the data analysis, and the qualitative data suggested certain themes. And what I'm doing with that is I am working to build basically a network of organizations, mental health organizations, just community organizations, to figure out, okay, here are the key themes, here are the key issues that farmers have identified. How do we now address them? And then I'm putting together a farmer wellness team and SDSU extension to focus on holistic wellness, because part of my survey assessed for health issues. Well, the biggest health issues, and this was on both males and females, are high cholesterol, high blood pressure, arthritis, obesity, and heart disease.
Right.
So and all those things are, stress plays a factor in all of those things, right? And, Chris has talked about this, Becky has talked about this. They are experiencing chronic stress. When your body is under chronic stress, health concerns are going to rise. If you don't have the finances to go to a doctor, or maybe you've let your health insurance go, your health is declining. So what can we do with all this information? So putting together teams across South Dakota to address these concerns. So that's, a lot, you're right. A lot of times farmers receive a survey and it's like, oh, I have to, what happens with this data?
Right.
Well,
Right.
I'm organizing teams to try to figure out how do we work with these themes? How do we address these issues? Because lots of times we throw program after program after program, but we don't really know what they need. So
Right.
I started at the beginning. So that was a long story to your question,
No.
but
Yeah.
that's what I'm doing with my data, at least.
Right. I think Becky, if you could speak to that, maybe if FarmNet, working with researchers, kind of you're often the intermediate body between what's the latest in, mental health first aid, and then trying to apply it to the reality of service provision, and then working with farmers. If you have any examples of that, or what that process is like in terms of research being used.
Well, I wish that we had more research here in New York State. We might be talking to Andrea in the future, but around, it's very hard to measure mental health needs and hold those discussions because our work is confidential. It's not like farming communities are very small. And, more than likely, the farmer knows the farmer down the road and maybe even be related to the farmer down the road through his wife or through his grandma. I mean, so the kind of research that would really give us insight into the emotional dynamics of a farmer and the farm family is difficult to collect.
Right. So we're just at about 5 minutes left is all, and we might just go towards closing reflections and thoughts. So just a reminder to the attendees, if you've any questions, we have about 5 minutes left. If you want to put any questions, comments, or reflections into the chat, please do so. Chris, I suppose from your perspective, in a very applied way, if you had advice for a farmer who was listening in today, and was going through a hard time, what would be your advice to that individual?
First, I want to comment on Andrea said that it was stress affecting your health.
Right.
I'm reasonably in decent shape. I went to a doctor quarterly for blood work and such like that, and I found out in 2015 I had a 95% blockage in my LAD, and it nearly took my life. So that was kind of totally out of the blue. I mean, stress, I think, played a big part of it. What I would say is that, again, I would look at it in terms of mental health, mental well-being, stress, all that. And if you're having, if you're having pressures on you and the like, it has to be viewed in the same way as if you have any kind of physical ailment, and you need to reach out, find a professional, find someone, or even a friend like that, talk to them, start the process of opening up, and then to the farmers. I was in situations where, again, I lost in 2011, Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee, at the point of right I was about to harvest, wiped out my entire crop. So I had about 95% of my investment in, and it was just gone.
Right.
And what people realize you got to take one day at a time. And the world's going to keep spinning. No one's going to grab you and put you in debt or prison right away. We don't do that anymore. At least we hopefully won't do it anymore. But take one day at a time. Realize that there are always options. There are always things you could do, whether it be loans or whatever. But it's not the end of the world. You need to take. I keep saying this over. You need to take one day at a time, and reach out and talk to people and look for assistance. And, you know, we happen to be blessed in New York State with FarmNet. And we can contact our extension agents who are connected with them, and they're able to reach out to them and connect us with the proper person to work with. And I keep giving the message to my federal contacts that model needs to be applied across the country, and that's what really would help out a great deal. But I would say to farmers, it's, you know, no matter what kind of thing you're facing, it's not the end of the world. You need to take one day, one step at a time, and then go from there, and not make any rash decisions either. You never want to make any kind of rash decision on anything, and you want to be thoughtful and think about it. And that's what I would say.
Right. It's very good. Yeah. Becky, I'm wondering from your perspective, from FarmNet's perspective, you know, if an organization who works in provision for farmers and that wanted to, you know, understood the reality of farmer mental health, felt ill-equipped in their own capacity to engage with it, what advice would you have maybe for them in equipping themselves more robustly, I suppose, to help support the farmers in this area?
Oh, I would just invite discussion with them, be very open to that, as Greg Merck, our executive director, would also be very open for that discussion. We know we've talked with other states that are interested in opening up a program somewhat like us, but we also know that every state is different. Every state is unique in the way that they could take pieces, perhaps, of what FarmNet does. I wish, as Chris has said, I wish we could take our program and multiply it for every state across the union. It would be really beneficial.
Right.
But would love the discussion.
Absolutely, yeah. And Andrea, just from your perspective, from being involved in lots of different aspects of this topic, and from maybe a mile high view, what do you think are the important aspects, you know, for farmer mental health going forward and support strategies?
That's a loaded question. What's
Come at
challenging
it from whatever angle you want, you know.
I know. I have sat on numerous national calls lately with colleagues across the United States, and the issue is until some of these structural barriers are
Right.
are alleviated or resolved or even just improved somehow. Sometimes it feels like we're putting Band-Aids on really big bleeding holes. You know, it's it's so challenging. I think we've made so much progress, Connor, though, in our conversations with mental health and agriculture. When I started working in this in 2014, I had extension folks, ag folks telling me you'll never get farmers to talk about mental health. And they do.
Right.
So I think we've come a long way, but to answer your question, honestly, I think the biggest thing that doing the needs assessment in South Dakota was huge, with trying to figure out what are the current issues and how do we address them as a state, not just separate entities, but how do we bring everybody together to address it? So working on that. But in the North Central region, there are a lot of programs. I encourage anyone to visit farmstress.org. You know, Michigan State University in Illinois put together rural resilience training for those of you that are agribusiness professionals to help identify farmers in distress. Becky talked about mental health first aid. There's QPR, question, persuade, refer, which is a suicide prevention training. COMET is used in Wisconsin and Minnesota. I'm sure that there are other states that use that. Several states have put together training for mental health providers on agriculture. I put together a graduate course. Illinois, Wisconsin also have training courses for mental health providers on agriculture. And that's very important, as one of the biggest concerns for producers is, will they understand what I'm talking about? Will they understand my job? There are lots of other ones, so I encourage you to visit farmstress.org for additional resources.
Great. And apologies for for the big mile high view question. I think you dealt with it very well. So that's pretty much it, guys, for today. I just a reminder, Destiny put into the chat the post-session survey. You can see it's about 2 It's about 2 or 3 comments up. If you could just fill out that session, the post session survey, that would be very, very much appreciated. Finola, I see your face there.
Yeah, I got my timings all wrong, Connor.
Don't worry, Finola. Don't worry. We shared all your resources anyway. And I mentioned about some of those.
That's so embarrassing. Because I was watching out with the time, but I had it right, as you know, last night.
So I'm so sorry for our attendees, so they know. So Finola is logged in from Ireland, and me and Finola worked very closely on a farm mental health program in Ireland, training up service providers. We're just at time now, Finola, but if you want to share just a brief kind of overview of your work and maybe some lessons learned from across the pond.
Yeah. No, thanks so much, and my apologies to everyone that has listened in and checked in. So essentially, and the focus, I've been through my work with mental health and living on a farm in Central Ireland, and my dad grew up on a farm in Mayo. I've always had a very keen interest in how farmers address mental health, and as you know, when we were chatting last night, I suppose one of the issues I was thinking about is there an overemphasis on addressing farmers and mental health? I'm not saying that it shouldn't be done, but my key message would be that we keep it in perspective and that farmers aren't led to believe that they're the only cohort in a community that is struggling and can struggle with mental health, because there are so many other sectors in the group and in society that have mental health issues. And that we normalize it, that it's quite normal to experience mental health and poor mental health at that, Connor. And like a group that I was involved with, they established an international declaration on rural mental health research. I sent that paper on to you, and they established guiding principles for sharing and researching on farmers and mental health. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be looking at it, but I think we need to be more sensitive and be more supportive, and that there's a danger that in over-researching that we might alienate farmers from accessing the services, and that we might actually end up more re-stigmatizing it than reducing the stigma attached to it, Connor.
Right. So, it's a really interesting context.
Yeah, maybe I can join the conversation again on that.
Right. Do you know what, Finola?
I feel so embarrassed, but what can I do?
Not at all.
I can't reclaim the time. Yeah.
Do you know what? But do you know what? You probably can, Finola, because we discussed so much here, and we're going to have another session on this too as well. So and Destiny has shared all your materials too in the chat. If people want to scroll up there, so they can get a good context of that. And you know what? We'll have this discussion again anyway, Finola. So don't worry. We'll have you on, guys. We're going to have to finish up, unfortunately. But I just want to say a final thank you to the panelists today, to Becky, to Chris, to Andrea, and to Finola, who joined us, of course, and then also just the attendees. Thank you very much. It wouldn't be possible without you. And thanks for everyone's engagement in the chat. It makes always the discussion much more richer when the chat is flowing. And just a final reminder to, if you could complete the post-session survey, which is in the chat. Destiny put it in the chat. That would be very, very much appreciated. And just a final thank you to the team behind Fields of Knowledge, to Christina, to Alison, and to Destiny, who done all the behind work in preparing for today's session. And with that, I'll bid you a good day, everyone. Thank you.